Hello, people who are joining us. We're glad to have you for our webinar today. We're waiting a few minutes for people to join in. Welcome to everybody who's joining us. We're taking a few minutes to gather people, let people sign in. One thing you might do while you're coming to this, if you've already looked at the report, is to jot down a couple of comments or questions or ideas you want to bring up. We hope as we go to make this really interactive, and you could start preparing for that now while we're waiting a couple minutes for attendees to sign in. Thanks to everyone who's joining us. I'm Jeremy Roschelle with the CIRCL Center. We're just going to wait one more minute for people to join us. I see a lot of attendees still signing on. If you've had a chance to look at the report, Carly has put it in the chat, the link to it, so you could start taking a peek. We also hope to make this an interactive discussion as we go, and so you could start thinking about some of the ideas, comments, questions, thoughts that you might want to bring to the discussion. And in just 1 minute, we'll get started. So thanks so much for joining us today. Jonathan, would you go back to the cover slide so people know they're coming to the right thing? Thank you. Okay, I think we'll get started now. So first of all, thank you for joining us. I'm Jeremy Roschelle. I'm the PI for the CIRCL Center. And joining me today, we'll have Judy Fusco, also a co-PI, Erin Walker, and Sarita Pillay. They're all co-PIs of our new center. And so the context of this is in the as we were closing up our prior center, which you may know is the CIRCL Center, we wanted to do a review of what had we been part of for the past 7 or 8 years. And that's also really good material to launch us into this new center, CIRCLs, which we started this month and will carry on for at least 3 years. And so we're excited to bring the work forward and share with you. And we hope to both share some information about the report and to make this an interactive discussion. And so, Jonathan, you can go forward to the next slide. These are the organizations that are involved in our center, and thanks to the National Science Foundation for supporting this. And next slide, please. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to give you a brief overview of the report. It drills into 5 topics in the actual report. We didn't want to go through that many in a webinar, so we're going to talk about 3. And after we share a few ideas about each topic, we are going to invite you to jot down some of those questions, thoughts, comments, reactions that you have. We might talk about some of them right away. We might talk about some of them a little later in the interactive discussion. After we talk about the 3 topics, we'll also talk about some recommendations in the report. And that these might be particularly important to think about as this community goes forward, perhaps as you're planning RETTL or other proposals, you may be wanting to look at those recommendations. Okay, so the overview, I'll get started. It's hard for me to believe this, but we had a first Cyberlearning event in 2012, so long ago. We had produced all these beautiful, colorful graphic illustrations. Many people joined. They had many wishes, thoughts, dreams of what this new funding stream would become for Cyberlearning. And part of that was the idea that we'd be investigating new genres, a word that we all had trouble figuring out exactly what that meant, but we're going to investigate new things. Go to the next slide, please. And now it's 2020, 8 years have passed. It's kind of a transition time. The phrase cyberlearning is one that has lived its life. We don't plan to be using that phrase. It confused some people that it might mean learning about cybersecurity, for example. And some people, cyber has negative connotations. So we're at a transition point that way. The CIRCL Center ended, and as I mentioned, we've begun CIRCLs, which doesn't use the word cyberlearning. And also there's the new RETTL solicitation. We had an excellent webinar last week about the solicitation led by the program officers from NSF, Tanya and Amy. And you can look at that solicitation if you missed it, plus a wealth of material about how to propose to RETTL by going to our circles.org website, and you'll find it under proposals. And so anyway, all these transitions were going on. We decided to reflect and on what had happened. Next slide, please. And so, just a ton of stuff happened on our website. We archived about 450 awards that have been granted. 1,000 different project leaders were involved in those. We had 9 convenings and this long list of events. I'm not going to read it all. Our website grew to be very rich. 78 people offering perspectives, 29 primers about key topics in the field. If you haven't looked at primers, they're still a super valuable resource. And people told us they really enjoyed being part of this community and that it was really special. And we just wanted to look back and say, what happened? So what we did is review all those 8 years and try to make sense of it in a couple major strands of activity. And we did that by looking at all the material we had archived and by inviting a set of program officers, advisors, and other members of the field to reflect with us on what it had all meant. And the major question we were asking is, what happened? What was all this wonderful work? Next slide, please. And the phrase we came up with at the end of that reflection was cyberlearning projects were really ambitious mashups. They explored a novel approach to a learning goal that wasn't in common circulation in the world. They were using technologies that would become available in 5 to 10 years. It might be something that involves touch or haptics or gesture, or AR and VR, AI. They brought to bear different learning theories. We'll talk about some of those actually in this webinar. They were very multidisciplinary. And as we progressed, we saw this sense of equity challenges coming more and more to the foreground. And this concept of ambitious mashups was a bit of a surprise and an illumination to us, as we thought what we would find when we reviewed the portfolio is that in particular genres of work, we didn't know what a genre was, but we thought maybe we would see in augmented reality, here's exactly what happened, or in AI, here's what happened, or in embodied cognition, here's what happened. But when we looked at actual projects, they didn't have one theme. They were really exploring the connections among these themes. And this, when we met with advisors and program officers, they really thought this ambitious mashups term was starting to capture what was the unique work of this community of research. So that's the title of our report. What's in the report is there's a really great history of the program that we had lots of people give input to. All the program officers who had ever been part of this gave us input on how it had come to be. So it's fun to read that if you want to know what the 8 years were about. There's 5 themes that we provide some review on: AI, learning theories, research methods, out of school learning, because cyber learning was very much not just about in-school learning. So we really wanted to dig into that. And it was exciting in part because we had people who might have been in a museum community coming together with other investigators, and it's a big ideas and trends. And we're going to talk about 3 of those areas today, as well as the recommendations. And we view this as an introduction to the report and an opportunity to discuss it. When you go to the website, we hope you read the report. It has a short web form, but there's a lot more detail if you download the PDF. So if you find it intriguing, please take a moment to get the PDF and read that version. We think we'll find that really useful. Next slide. Okay, and so now I'm going to turn it off to my colleague, Erin, a co-PI of the center, who's going to talk about our first theme. And remember that we're going to invite you to react, type questions, comments after Erin gives a few remarks. Erin?
Hi, everybody. So I'm Erin Walker. I'm a professor at the University of Pittsburgh, and I have a joint appointment in the Learning Research and Development Center there and the School of Computing and Information. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about the artificial intelligence area that we identified amongst the Cyberlearning projects. Next slide. So we identified 4 main clusters of projects within this theme of artificial intelligence. One cluster was intelligent tutoring systems work, so work that looked at developing models of how students solve problems or engage in learning activities, sometimes open-ended learning activities, and then supported the students as they did that. Machine learning work, so looking at features of student interactions with systems or with each other, and then how those features could be used computationally to predict either learning outcomes or things like motivational states, affective states. Speech, vision, and natural interaction was another cluster. So looking at using automated methods to analyze how students interacted with each other in natural ways, using speech, using gesture, using gaze, and then looking at synthesizing that within intelligent agents to produce similar types of natural interaction. And finally, social agents and robots were the 4th cluster that we identified. So looking at creating learning companions and partners for students that could really go with them on a learning journey and support them as they go. And so something to point out here is that these areas are all very complementary. So a lot of projects span multiple types of AI, multiple themes, and really findings in one area can inform what people do in a different area. Next slide. So here's an example project that we wanted to bring to your attention. I think this is a great example of an ambitious matchup. So this is a project on speech-based learning analytics for collaboration led by Cynthia D'Angelo. And in this project, middle school students worked together in groups of 3s and collaborated on mathematics problems. And the goal was to use low-level features of their speech to predict specific qualities of their collaboration. So the researchers coded their collaboration both for positive individual qualities and positive group level qualities, and then extracted features of speech like prosodic features, timing features, and used it to predict those qualities. So I think this is really exciting. It's an example of 2 of the clusters we talked about above. So speech and natural interaction, and then also machine learning, which was used to predict this collaboration. And it really draws from learning theory in terms of how to code and understand collaborative activities, but also cutting edge AI in terms of how to do these automated predictions. And so the contributions that the researchers made were both back into theories of collaboration and into artificial intelligence technologies. Next slide. And so reflecting across all of the cyber learning projects, there were few things we noticed that changed over time. So for example, participation of AI experts grew over time as part of the cyber learning community. We brought more and more AI experts in. And that really created these projects that were these combinations of AI grounded in learning theory. So that intersection and synergy really strengthened as the community grew. Over time, there was an increased emphasis on AI-based analysis techniques and using automated methods to really understand how students interact with a system or interact with each other. And also this drive towards open platforms. So for example, assessments is a great example of this, where multiple research can come in and collect data and run experiments and answer research questions. So thinking about how to scale up our research and connect different researchers to have a greater impact. And then, of course, in recent years, ethics and equity has been a big subject of discussion surrounding these projects. And we're anticipating, a highly increased focus on that as we move forward. And so reflecting on the cyber learning portfolio, what we've done so far, a few key questions emerge. So one question is, how can cutting edge AI research better inform cyber learning projects? So how do we move forward even more towards creating this mashup between state-of-the-art AI and work that's really solidly grounded in learning theory? And then how can we empower and involve stakeholders, students, teachers, parents, administrators? How do we get them involved early on in the design process, but also think about giving them agency as they interact with the technologies that we build? And then finally, what issues related to AI, fairness, and equity need to be considered in the future? So how do we continue to foreground this in our projects and really seriously engage with issues of ethics and equity as we move forward? And I'm really excited to see what the future in this area holds. So I'm going to pause for a moment and give people a chance to think of comments and questions, post them in the Q&A, and then we'll move over to another theme.
I don't see questions or comments emerging yet, Erin. But I did want to mention to people that one thing that has always characterized CIRCL events is being interactive, being a little experimental, playing along. And they're starting to appear, so it might just be it took them a little time. Great. So let's leave another minute. Maybe you'll be inspired by some of the questions that Greg, David, and Chip have put in there. Yeah. These are great questions. Thank you for asking. So let's see if we can get a few more. We'll allow another minute and then we'll move on. And we may answer some of these questions as we go if we think we know the answer. Some of them, I'm just noticing Chip's question, what are examples of equity issues? We might know something, but also that's something CIRCL hopes to host a working group about, where we would work together as a community together to think about equity issues and how in our projects we can respond to them, not just talk about them. How can we take action to be more anti-racist, for example? Great. These are all really wonderful questions. Thanks for playing along. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Judy Fusco, who will tell us about learning theories.
You're muted.
Mute.
Well, hi everyone. I'll repeat what I said. Thanks for coming. And I've been a part of CIRCL since the original summit in 2012. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to be talking about learning theories in our projects. And they've been a deep part of the cyber learning program since the beginning. And as Jeremy mentioned, you can read more about how the program officers really thought carefully about them and their role that they played in the projects through the introductory section of the report. So this learning theories section that I'm talking about focuses on projects that included collaborative learning, embodied learning, and identity. I'm going to note that though cognitive theories are very much a part of cyber learning projects, they were discussed in other places in the report as we considered games, simulations, visualizations, and AI. And also, as Jeremy and Aaron noted, most of our projects don't have just one theory in them. They were ambitious mashups of theories to really guide the design of what was needed for the learners and the learning. Next slide. So I'm going to dive a little deeper to some of the work done in the area of embodied learning theories. Rob Lindgren, a PI who works in this area, says embodied interactions, for example, hand gestures and whole body movements, have shown promise for increasing learning in specific STEM concepts. So he goes on to say how we really need to more fully understand these motions and how they lead to an understanding of abstract ideas. And as we look at all of the work emerging in embodied learning and cyber learning, we see that this kind of work is only possible with the use of sensors, advanced gesture recognition technologies, and immersive visualizations that create learning environments where students can learn with intuitive motions. So we noted how important these interdisciplinary teams were to really understand embodied learning. The images on this slide show, first on the left, Connected Worlds, which is an animated world project at the New York Hall of Science, and it serves as a research platform for a variety of social learning contexts, from classroom interactions to large-scale embodied games. The next picture, which is top right, is an image from Rob Lindgren's Gesture Augmented Simulations for Supporting Explanations project, or GRASP. And that project allowed students to make hand gestures to act out how they thought molecules moved in different conditions. So, and in this and related work, his team showed that using the movement of one's body to predict how objects in space will move is good for learning. And now they're investigating if gestures can help learning transfer to different scientific domains. The image on the bottom right is from the Signing Avatars and Immersive Learning Project, or SAIL. And the SAIL project is creating a proof of concept American Sign Language learning experience in virtual reality. And it has plans to conduct an EEG cognitive neuroscience experiment to better understand the embodied learning that's happening. So I wanted to share and highlight these projects. I find them fascinating with their mashups. And I'd also like to share that there are many, many more projects like this in our portfolio, or in the CIRCL portfolio on the website. And there were also a series of workshops sponsored by the National Science Foundation, and we have a link on our workshop on our website, and I think it's going into chat now. And in those cyber learning workshop reports, They did a lot of thinking about learning theories, and one of the workshops focused on the future of embodied design for mathematical imagination and cognition. Next slide. So reflecting, what changed over time? Well, we did see more equitable learning environments. We noted that in the 2017 report, and we see it continuing. And I will call out that I talked about the SAIL project on the previous slide. That project is led by an almost all deaf team, and it's capitalizing on the lived experiences of disability, and it's really important that it's created by a deaf team. Projects that were tagged with identity had also have a very strong equity focus. And I think I've just been pulled off the stage. So I'm going to let you read the rest of them, and I'm going to pause for a moment and let you type into the Q&A area any thoughts that you have. But I'll just end by asking you to, read the questions that we're thinking about going forward.
Thanks again for jumping in and typing questions and thoughts. We really encourage that. And also, one question that seems to appear a couple times is, what are the kinds of equity issues we see and what are people doing about that? And I put in one response, if you go to the answers, which is to look at the Cyberlearning 2019 keynotes, which both highlight some of the issues, particularly Sophia's talk, and how you might approach the work to do something about this, particularly Angela's keynote. Both wonderful resources to get a sense of what the community has been talking about. Let's take another moment or two to get a few more questions and thoughts. Great additional questions coming in. Thanks so much. All right, I'm going to welcome to the stage my colleague Sarita, who will talk some about NSF big ideas and other themes that influence the work.
Hi, everyone. I am Sarita Pillay at Education Development Center, co-PI on the CIRCL Center. Slide, Jonathan. So one of the 5 reflections that we developed looked at both external and NSF trends and themes that influenced the field. And certainly a significant influence on this community has been the evolution of NSF's mid and long-term research and investment priorities. Essentially, they're the agency's 10 big ideas. And so amongst these and other trends, some key themes had notable influence on cyber learning projects. First, of course, the NSF big ideas, harnessing the data revolution, convergence research, future work at the human technology frontier, but also other themes such as neuroscience and NSF smart and connected communities. I'll discuss these 5 themes next, and then I'll end my portion of the presentation with a look at the future and the implications of the NSF Includes initiative and mid-scale research infrastructure initiatives on this field. Thanks, Jonathan. Data science. Data science learning was very present in early projects, such as the Community Online Data Analysis Platform, or CODAP project, and I'll provide a little bit of an overview of that at the end. Over time, the community has explored issues related to the relationship between big data and convergence research, the barriers to integrating data science into education, and of course, the ever-pervasive issues of data ethics and privacy. In terms of the future of work, that theme emerged perhaps last among these big ideas and gathered some momentum in directly funded projects. And certainly now society's response to the COVID-19 pandemic is pushing us more rapidly. And recent projects have begun to explore how new forms of work that engage teams through technology can also provide stronger opportunities to learn and grow. In terms of neuroscience, with the launch of the Obama administration's BRAIN initiative in 2013, cyber learning researchers were exploring ways in which advances in technology can bridge the learning sciences and neuroscience in impactful ways. Projects on multimodal models of learning and embodied learning experiences have explored how neurocognitive tools such as fMRI and eye tracking can be used to advance cyber learning research and development, and increasingly there's been great emphasis on the needs of neurodiverse learners. And with the concept of smart and connected communities, which involves utilizing networks of individuals, organizations, and technology to foster lifelong learning and problem solving in really a variety of contexts and communities, that's been applied in projects such as the Mobile City Science Project, which I'll overview now in a minute. But there still remain fairly complex issues to be grappled with, such as establishing trusting relationships between partner entities and learning participants, issues of equity and access, which you've seen has been a recurring theme in all of our reflections, and data privacy concerns. And as we look to the future, the NSF Includes initiative, which is a comprehensive national initiative to broaden and diversify US leadership in STEM, has really been highly relevant to cyber learning. Many current Includes projects organize a group of stakeholders to tackle a challenge in educational and career pathways, but few have a learning technology emphasis. So there's great potential in building stronger collaborative connections between Includes and cyber learning. And finally, it's become clear that there remains a missing infrastructure component for cyber learning that, if in place, could really enable outcomes to be scaled. And as Jeremy said earlier, CIRCL convened a reflections panel of current and former NSF program officers and CIRCL advisors to reflect on future directions for cyber learning. And the panel posed 3 questions. What does it mean to scale up in cyber learning? What mid-scale infrastructure would most benefit this community? And where does the amassed knowledge within the cyber learning community go next? So while there are funding streams that already exist at NSF and elsewhere for the typical sense of scaling up, how does the cyber learning community engage in more intensive consideration of mid-scale infrastructures, which could be platforms or data sets or instrumentation that enable multiple research projects to more rapidly conduct related cyber learning explorations? Also, how do we have a greater focus on knowledge management? Because the impacts of cyber learning explorations would be far greater if insights were more readily accumulated in shareable forms. Slide. So finally, I leave you with a little bit more detail on the 2 projects that I mentioned, CODAP, the Common Online Data Analysis Platform from the Concord Consortium, was funded by a very early grant and is a platform designed explicitly for data science education, allowing students to build visual representations and to create and modify hierarchical structures, which are all extremely important parts of experience the doing of data science. And Mobile City Science, which is a collaboration between the University of Washington, the Digital Youth Network, and the New York Hall of Science, is a curriculum that provides youth with mapping and tracking tools that helps them collect and analyze and argue from spatial and digital data that they collect in their neighborhoods using location-aware and mobile technologies. And some quotes related to both of those from our prior work. And with that, I will pause for a moment or two, as we've done before, for your comments and questions and your reflections in chat. Thank you.
I do want to mention on mid-scale infrastructure, there really is a lot of encouragement for educational PIs to begin thinking about that. And there's a webinar on Friday. We're not hosting it, another group is. We'll put that in the chat, the link to that webinar if you want to learn more about what that's about on Friday. We'll just give another minute or two to get people's thoughts and questions. So maybe go back one slide to the issues, because that may help people think of questions they have as well. Perfect. I'll just give another minute there. And then we'll do one more segment and take some of your questions. One thing that's really rewarding to me is the questions and comments you're offering are very much in the theme of what this work was about. Not necessarily things that we all have answers to, but these are the questions of this body of work and work that we hope RETTL will continue to take up. Let's have one more minute for your thoughts, and then we'll move on to the next part. Okay, Jonathan, can you take us to the next slide, please? Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the recommendations that are in the report. I think, especially if you're thinking about a January 25th RETTL proposal, this section is worth paying attention to, as a good number of these recommendations came out of conversations among program officers, both past and present program officers, as well as the advisors I had mentioned earlier. So I'm just going to discuss 3 of the recommendations. Next slide. Communicating what's unique, also in your proposal, focusing about what's unique about this opportunity, that it's for exploratory and for stuff that can't happen today at any kind of scale, but may happen 5 to 10 years from now. We talked about ambitious mashups. Of course, this work really is design research with lots of interconnected iterations. And that's very, very noticeable in the work. Projects often don't end up where they thought they were starting out because of those iterations. Really getting the computer scientists or AI experts, the subject matter, disciplinary experts, the learning sciences working together was something that really happened. And when we interviewed principal investigators who'd been part of this, that's one of the values they saw about this strand of work and funding, is that they could, if they were an interdisciplinary person, they could find a home in doing this kind of work here, whereas in other funding programs, only a slice of who they were might appear. And the question in green at the bottom relates to the last bullet, that this area is not contained to a particular subject matter, grade level, teaching a particular concept. And the advisors really wanted to share how much they thought the opportunity to think longer term about a person's lifetime and not just a single learning experience was really something that they want to encourage in this area, to take that lifelong, life-wide perspective to the work. A second area, Jonathan, if you can cut over to the next slide, strength in reporting. So this was a problem we faced as well, is that, oh, I have some dog problems. I apologize for the mailman coming. Clarity, it was hard to find out what all the Cyberlearning projects did, even for us. And so we really would like to encourage people as they're planning their projects to think about being really clear about what's going to come out of your project. How are you going to communicate it? How can you make it really visible, what you've learned, and thinking about how you're honoring the cross-cutting nature. And we just want to say the field needs to get better at this. If we're to sustain NSF interested in funding it, it's got to become easier to figure out what the outputs are and to synthesize them. Next slide, Jonathan. And then enhancing the equity work. So a couple components that were recommendations from this group of advisors and program officers, really involving in not just to give you an impression, but in the design work, making sure you're involving diverse participants, really at every level. Who are your advisors? Who's your core research team? Who are your graduate students? Who are you interacting with in the context in which your learning environment is being tested? Being attuned to the pressing issues out there. There are privacy issues. There are fairness issues, transparency issues. How do we let people using our technologies know what they're doing and how they're collecting data? There's a lot of interest right now in human-centered, responsible, ethical AI and computing. I would say our field doesn't have a definition for us of what that means now. So there's an opportunity to write some great position papers. And then, how do we make our community more open? It's something CIRCL worked on continuously. We tried to reach out to institutions that don't normally win as many awards in this area and help them come on board. Those might be historically Black colleges. We had a buddy program. I think we're going to rename it. But the idea was to reach out and ask PIs to bring someone to the PI meeting who wouldn't ordinarily be there. And we really hope to continue doing that, to continue to grow who's in this community. So, and we just think there's a lot, looking at the body of work, we think a lot of people said the top thing they care about is these equity, ethical, diversity issues, but we need to get more concrete. What are we doing in our research? You can go on, Jonathan. And I think we are now up to discussion. So what we would love to do in this section is pretend we are in a conference and there's an open mic and you can walk up to it and share something that you're thinking about or ask a question. It doesn't have to be a question though. We'd love to hear something you're sharing, you would love to share. And the way you walk up to the mic is to click the raise hand button in your screen. And then we'll select people who have raised their hand to say a few words, and we'll turn on their video and let them participate, or at least their audio. So we now invite you to walk up by clicking that raise hand button. Yeah, we're putting our Twitter handle, and so that's fine to leave on there. Thanks, Jonathan. So anyone like to share a comment or a thought? Reaction to the report?
Hi, this is Dennis Newman.
Hey, Dennis.
I don't think my camera is on, but I'm here in Encinitas, California. And I wanted to find out what people were thinking in terms of evaluating whether the programs that you are working on are helping with outcomes like, measurable outcomes like test scores or discipline referrals, or and whether, if there are test score gains, whether they are equitable across ethnic groups and racial groups. So that's my thought.
Yeah, great thought. Is it anyone else on the panel want to respond? If not, I'm happy to. You'd have to turn on your camera and mic to do so. I would say, Dennis, this body of research has been largely design research, and so there has been evaluative research in it, but it's not usually test score data that people are looking at. They may be looking at, do people engage in the ways they expected? I would hope they're looking at how different people engage differently in the projects. They are looking in detail about learning processes and how learning is occurring, and is that getting us somewhere? But I think other NSF programs are a bit more tuned, as well as IES programs, to looking at, did it move the needle type questions in a large scale sample. And so that hasn't been the strength of this body of work. And I would refer people to the common guidelines for research that are both Department of Ed and NSF. And those guidelines, this really fits, this body of work is really in the exploratory sector of that work. Interestingly, evaluators are not required as part of RETTL proposals. Research is required, but you're not necessarily, I don't understand that you're required to have an evaluator in your proposal. Other questions, thoughts?
This is Peter Halpin. Can you hear me? I think I've been unmuted.
Yes, Peter.
Hi, thanks for this webinar. It's really informative and actually kind of fun. And a question I have is related to kind of how the community is responding to, I guess, the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Do you feel like there's particular research opportunities that are pressing or more pressing because of the current situation, or maybe the long-term impacts of kind of how public schooling and university teaching is changing? Just your thoughts on kind of how that might play out in terms of future research would be interesting.
One of my colleagues want to share anything about that? I think we each see things that are different institutions and perspectives. Go ahead, Judy.
Well, you can take it back in just a second. I was just going to jump in and mention CIRCL educators are actual practicing teachers that we work with a lot and hear a lot about what's happening on the ground. In March, when everything changed for everyone, we did some interviews and heard about some of the issues, and absolutely that's top of everyone's mind. And I think that as we go forward in circles, one of the things we are going to try to do is really integrate educators' perspectives into different working groups. So please, share with educators that we are wanting to make this bridge between research and practice much stronger. And I'm going to turn it back to Jeremy to see if you have other things to add.
I'm going to see if any of our other panelists want to.
Well, I would just say that in my work outside of cyber learning per se at EDC, a lot of my work is focused around sort of STEM and workforce success, and thus post-secondary transitions into community colleges and higher education and what it means for work. And I do think, the future of work, which is something I think about a lot in my work, is really changing rapidly. I mean, what the future of work looks like, in 3 to 6 months is drastically different than what it looked like 3 to 6 months ago. And so I think there's really an opportunity for this community. And it's one of the things I said in my presentation. When we think about how the world of work is engaging and how we prepare learners for the world of work, how our teams are having to engage almost exclusively with technologies. What are the opportunities for this community to really contribute to knowledge building along learning in sort of the lifelong spectrum of learning? How do employers onboard new employees? How do they continue to build skills of their staff, et cetera? And how do we prepare young people to be prepared to enter a world of work and post-secondary education that's going to look quite different than anything any of us have ever been prepared for? So those are, some of the things that are.
I think something we've also seen that I would add, thank you, Sarita, is tremendous growth in certain platforms that have presence in our community. One is assessments that report just enormous growth. And so creating more, and assessments is a very open thing where different researchers can propose experiments and data collections. And so huge opportunity because just more people engaging with systems. Another area I've heard from people on who want to study collaborative discourse, and in a classroom, it's hard to isolate the microphones, but now they have kids collaborating on Zoom more, and they're starting to be able to collect corpuses of data and isolate speakers in new ways. And of course, the resurgence of interest, it's not just COVID, it's the year of Black Lives Matter and those issues coming to the fore as well. So there were rapid proposals that looked at equities and inequities in who's able to participate in education. And those might be more advocacy issues for our community than research issues, just not having fair access to even join an online or remote teaching thing. So it's basically just lots of activation on lots of levels is what we're seeing. Anyone else want to say something? Or do you want to say some more, Peter?
No, thank you.
I think it does make our opportunity as people think about RETTL proposals and proposals to other parts of NSF that touch on technology and learning. There was a time in the 8-year history of the work we did where the interest at NSF in technology waned a bit, and we were worried maybe this will just go away, but that's not true now. There's super high interest and cross-directorate work. The AI Institute that was funded in learning is one sign of that. Colorado Boulder, $20 million institute. There's another institute competition going on now. And so I think forever in the research, what's going on now is going to shape what people propose. We have time for one or two more folks to come to the mic. There's one hand raised, perhaps.
Hello?
Hi.
Oh, hi. Okay. So I have a question about the future direction of artificial intelligence. So, we have a lot of people who don't understand how it works and think like, oh, everything's going to be monitored and controlled and tracked. And in some ways they are, especially with test-taking technologies that we're seeing implemented at the college level. But I'm just wondering, like, so you guys have seen the overall trends, like how do you see artificial intelligence being integrated into different learning spaces?
Yeah, so I'll start with that one. So I think what we're seeing in our community is a huge opportunity for personalization and really deep personalization. So thinking about individual features that drive learning activities, and thinking about all different kinds of learning activities, informal learning spaces like community centers, in addition to classrooms, social learning environments where kids are working together, um, and using AI to model what's going on and then provide some kind of intervention. I think a lot of the conversation surrounding the report was on giving stakeholders agency and control over what's happening. And I think that's going to be a major theme going forward too. So not this very kind of prescriptive big brother, we're collecting all these data and we're making these recommendations that nobody understands, but really thinking from early on in the design stage, how to get people involved in designing technologies that they want to use. And then when we have this data, how do we give students agency over the decisions that they make based on reflections, that they get about themselves? How do we give teachers agency over their own classrooms? So I also see that as a major direction in the immediate future. And I think we're going to see that spanning multiple different kinds of projects.
And building on that, I want to, it's actually a great question for us to begin to wrap this up because it points to some other things that'll be forthcoming as well. So we had also in June pulled together a panel of experts to think about the future of AI in education, and both to take in the metaphors we have, like personalized and adaptive, but also to think beyond them. And a couple thoughts that came up from that. I'm just going to preview a report that's going to be forthcoming. Huge interest in orchestrating classrooms and how AI assistants are really helping orchestrate a process that has people in it too, and that they're partners in rather than more the AI independently making recommendations just to one individual or adapting to just one individual, but thinking about collaborative process and social process is a huge theme. In assessment, just huge interest in thinking about competencies and how could we detect skills and growth in skills that students have that are not the things that our tests most commonly measure. One scenario for that, how do we build a portrait of a student as a writer across all the experiences in which they may do some writing? Could we start to understand each student as a writer and what's up for them next, not contextualized by just one class. So augmenting human reasoning rather than just taking over, expanding naturalistic interaction with gesture and speech, broadening competencies. Also people looking at, can AI help us reveal and see more of how learning really occurs, especially as more of it's occurring online? Can we just be more on the research level, more insightful? And so sometime in November, we'll be releasing a report about what the expert panel suggested. And this is a theme that the center will pursue, is how can we take AI between the most dominant metaphors and stories of the past decade what's going to be different in the next decade? Because I do think the conversation's out there in the public, cycle on just a couple ideas, and what is happening in AI is much broader. And we see those in the AI institutes as well. One example there is AI that can look at classroom interactions and suggest segments that a teacher and a teacher's coach or a teacher's mentor might want to review together based on observations, so maybe body posture and what was happening there. And so just a lot of exciting new possibilities that take us beyond. A theme of teachers is really big. How do we help teachers and partner with teachers? It's really big in what we're seeing. Anyway, it is 2 o'clock, so I want to thank you for attending and staying with us. Please read the report online. Please follow us on Twitter and stay in touch for much more. And thanks to all my fellow speakers and CIRCL's team members. Okay, bye now.